Good evening. This is the Village of Gulf Manor Plan Commission meeting for Monday, February 7th, 2022. This is a reorganization meeting of our Planning Commission. Every year, we usually take a look at leadership of the committee. After an election, when we have council members who join council or are reelected, council appoints new members at times. And we did have a couple people who were up for reappointment. Council did elect to reappoint Mr. Betcher to the council seat on the Planning Commission, as well as renewed Mr. Scott's membership for the next 4 years. So the first thing that we'll do this evening is ask the members of the commission to elect their chair and their vice chair. So we just need a motion to elect someone as chair of the Planning Commission.
I move to elect Mr. Sibley, chair of the commission.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
Are there any other nominees?
Anyone?
Please,
Anyone?
please. You're sitting in the chair.
Bueller.
Do we have a voice vote?
Sure.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
I'm
kidding.
Okay, Mr.
I'm not
Sibley,
kidding. He's not kidding.
you need to do your vice chair.
All right. So I'm going to make a motion to nominate Mr. Betcher as vice chair.
Ooh, turnaround's fair play.
Do I hear a second?
I second the motion.
Is there any other nominations?
Oh, gosh.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So the next thing we need to do is adopt Robert's rules, I believe. Is there a motion to adopt Robert's rules?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So just one side note here is we anticipate at the next council meeting that Mr. Marks and Mr. Snyder will switch positions. Mr. Marks is going to go to the executive committee. Mr. Snyder is going to come to this committee, but that all has to be done by council. So Mr. Snyder is sitting in this evening, so he's aware of what's going on.
Okay. Let's see.
Bye-bye.
Has everyone had a chance? Well, first of all, so the next thing we need to do is to approve the minutes from the January 3rd meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Let's see here. Second, I will. All right. I will.
Just go ahead and sign.
Okay.
Let's see the agenda. Oh, no. We did not.
You're right. All right. Let's see here. So is there a motion to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. Any new business?
We have 2 items for discussion tonight, actually 3 items, 2 of which I was going to address. We have no cases before us this evening. So one of the things we wanted to talk about, I think we briefly discussed at our last meeting, was perhaps a gap between our zoning code and the building code, where folks are not required to get a building permit, but we're not catching those for repairs and so forth that may need to be made. And so what we want to look at is, do we need to make any changes in our process? Do we make any changes in our code to capture where we have these concerns? I think Mr. Putoff mentioned roofing, driveways, stairs, and so forth. So what I did for everybody was I brought a copy of our zoning code relative to when the zoning permit is required. That's 114501.
This is zoning, not building, correct?
Right. Building code is enforced by the Hamilton County Building Department. We offloaded all our building work to them a few years ago. They were doing all our commercial, which was anything 3-family or above. And our single and 2-family were being done by NIC, National Inspection Corporation. We ended our relationship with NIC 4 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, 2018.
2018. And so at that time, we decided rather than trying to create it and bring it back in-house, we would focus on property maintenance, different code, and let building code go with the county, which a lot of communities do. Contractors like it because then they know it's one stop. They're supposed to go and get their permits. So a zoning permit, though, is different from a building permit. The zoning permit says what you're proposing to do, building-wise, is in compliance with the zoning code, setbacks, density, so forth. And very typically, a contractor would go to the Hamilton County. They would say you need to get a zoning permit, that we would know this is approval by Gulf Banner. Those are occasions where we would catch it and say, wait a minute, this is not approval, you need a variance. That's where it would come back before the Planning Commission as the Board of Zoning Appeals. But what you can see under 114501 is we have a pretty broad basis for when you require to have a zoning permit. No building or other structure shall be erected, moved, enlarged, structurally altered, nor shall any building, structure, land be established or changed in use without a zoning permit. So the first question is where we think there is this gap in community enforcement. Where do we think that gap occurs that we need to clarify 114501 to let people know zoning permits required?
Okay, well, on here, it also says that, provided that where a building permit is required, building permit shall also serve as a zoning permit.
Right.
Okay.
So when a building permit is required, they have to have a zoning permit. It says gaps where Hamilton County says, oh, you don't need a building permit for that.
Okay.
That we feel that we need to be able to step in to enforce the code. If we do say that's where we want to enforce the code, this becomes a practical question of, okay, what is the standard of that construction that we feel is not captured in the building code, that either we have to amend our building code or we have to get the county to start enforcing it. Once we do that, since we've offloaded that work to them, are they the ones who are going to do these inspections? So if we have a problem with the style of concrete used in steps, the materials, what's the building code require? Will Hamilton County allow us to set a standard for Gulf Manor? If we adopt it, will they enforce it? Or will they say, okay, we'll allow you as our agent to enforce that component part of it? Who's going to do the inspections? So if it's something we want to get into, we need to take the steps. First of all, define whether or not it's called for a zoning permit. If we believe it's not clear enough, amending that. Once we require a zoning permit, then what is the standard for that construction and who's going to inspect it to that standard? So Jim, do you want to chime in?
I contacted the county and talked to one of the supervisors about what, and I explained what we were doing, and I said, what's the threshold for a permit for you guys? The first question is about roofing, and they're like, yeah, we do require a permit for roofs. So we're gonna start enforcing that these contractors, they do a zoning for a roof, they gotta go get a building permit. And the county will come out and do the inspections on those.
So if you see a roofer, let me see your permit.
Correct.
If they don't have a permit, you can then say to the county, you need to come out here.
Well, I
By
can
property maintenance code, you could issue a stop
stop
work
work
order.
order on it, and then they have to get zoning first because they need a building permit, and then they have to get the building permit from the county.
So who's the
So
zoning
basically-
permit come from? Is this 2 steps to get it?
Anytime we require a building permit,
Zoning
A
permit.
zoning
They
permit's
need to have a
always
zone.
required.
okay.
When do they not require a building permit?
Concrete work. Which is amazing to me. Like, if it's footers, foundations, absolutely. But if you're pouring a driveway, the county doesn't want to be involved.
Or replacement of a sidewalk.
Yeah. They-
Well, if it's private, they don't want to be involved. If it's in the right of way, then typically, whether it's the city or the county, they do want to be involved.
Really?
So a sidewalk then? they
So-
would-
Sidewalk,
For instance, the
aprons?
public sidewalk.
Yeah.
Public sidewalk and the apron. Typically, they should get a permit and then somebody needs to inspect it.
Do they inspect afterwards, or they inspect when it's framed or performed rather?
The proper way is that, well, like, if it's the city of Cincinnati and they're most particular, you get the permit, then you're supposed to notify them that you're gonna start it. Then you have to have it inspected before the concrete's poured. Then supposedly they come back and, well, actually, they make you warranty it for a year. And then you have to have a license, and you have to have a bond. And then.
Because you're in the right of way.
Because you're in the right of way.
Okay.
For instance, if it falls apart, the bond is either you fix it or basically your insurance, your bond will have somebody fix that.
And I think we have in our code, if you are doing work in the right of way, you must get a permit from us.
So that would be any sidewalk repair or apron.
Well, the apron would definitely be right of way.
Right.
So it's like,
Sidewalk probably would be, but it's probably best to clarify that a public sidewalk would be. And then you get public sidewalk, you've got driveway, you've got interior sidewalks. What about a patio? Someone pours a patio in the back. Is county saying,
So what Billy told me is they don't get involved in that.
but if you put a deck on, they
It's
would.
private,
If you do
right?
a deck, they want, yeah, you gotta go and pull a permit for that.
Why would they care?
Structural.
Structural.
Yeah, structural.
Right.
Concrete, you know,
Yeah, it's
elevation.
yeah, it's either overhead or it's elevated in some fashion.
I was thinking, we're talking about these aprons, I walk all the time, so I see these aprons and people form them and pour them like within hours, I mean, so is it really practical that they're gonna form it and then they're gonna wait for the inspection before concrete's poured? Does that happen?
It does, some townships are more lenient, they'll inspect it afterwards, but then the problem is,
Yeah.
what if it's not right?
Yeah.
The only choice there is, you gotta tell the guy to rip it out. Basically, they're checking for the depth of it.
Right.
Anything, if it's a apron or the driveway approach that's in the right of way, it's supposed to be 7 inches thick. And the walkway that's through the drive, 7 inches thick. Everywhere else, 5 inches thick on a public sidewalk. The private, no, they don't. City of Cincinnati, they're not involved with that.
Well, I can call the county back tomorrow and confirm with the supervisor that that's how they operate. And if they don't, it sounds like that's probably something we should probably pursue, that ask them if they will.
Well, it gets back on the right of way because we control the right of way and you have to have a permit anytime you're working in the right of way from us.
is
The
that,
right of way
you're
permit.
speaking of the street opening permit?
Well, we should have a right of way permit too. Anytime we have a street opening, but it should be anytime you're doing work in the right of way. A lot of communities have right of way control ordinances. So we could pick up that gap, and in that right of way, we could establish the standard for construction. Concrete construction in the right of way is required to have a 7-inch depth. When they come to us for a permit for right of way, that's when we can find out, wait a minute, you're going too wide.
Right, there's rules on how wide you can go. For instance, let's say your lot's 50 feet. Typically, the rule of thumb is that you can't go more than a third of the width of your lot. So it might be like, for instance, your driveway width might be maximum of 18 feet. And that's, I think we have something like that. But it's the city of Cincinnati, Montgomery, for instance, they all have that. They don't want somebody's front yard to be a sea of concrete
Right.
Mhm.
or a parking lot.
Well,
Yeah.
Montgomery's example has a requirement of a setback from property line for a driveway it has a requirement on the maximum width of a driveway and the maximum apron where it's at the curb cut.
Yeah.
And then because that is in the right of way, you're not cutting into the curb without being in the right of way, that's where that can be controlled. And we can adopt that as a right of way control. And then when you see that work being done, you can do a stop work order. We don't have to worry about the county at that point because it's in our right of way. It's in our right of way.
So then we can do they would apply for a permit, we can inspect and say it's okay.
Correct.
So that would be on us to do.
And it's up to them, as Matt's pointing out, to let you know before you pour, to make sure you got your 7th inch step before you start to have to tear it
Right,
out.
so you have to inspect it.
But the
You'd be
question becomes-
surprised Some of these guys, there could be standing water in there, mud, I mean, it's more than just the 7 inches thick. You may show up and it's like, it's all mud. Well, of course, it's 7 inches thick, but what's
That's
there
what it says.
is mud, and it's like, okay, well, that's not gonna work,
Yeah,
you know?
But stairs, doesn't the county regulate building code stairs? In terms of the rise and the fall and everything
That was
else?
my question to Billy, if it's, whether it's poured or it's framed, it doesn't matter. The rise and the run is per
Right.
building code.
Right.
And he's like, well, yeah, technically, yes.
Technically, very specific.
The guy I talked to, Darren was the supervisor I wanted to speak to. He is off indefinitely with COVID. Billy is filling in with him, so he's new with the supervisor thing. So I figured I'd report back here and I'd have more questions to call and talk to maybe another supervisor.
Do they have any standards for concrete pours on steps other than the run and the rise?
It's in the building code, yeah.
So they do have a standard for
Yeah, it's
concrete.
in
on
the
steps.
Ohio Basic Building Code, or Ohio Building Code.
Whether it's concrete or wood, it's
Yeah.
the same.
So
It's-
we've got that covered by, you're gonna do the work, you have to get a building permit because they have jurisdiction over steps. We're gonna see it, we're gonna know it.
Correct.
Now, Matt's saying the sidewalk that runs from your driveway to the steps. Do we have a concern with the depth and the quality and the width and everything else?
Well, the only concern I would have is that people get taken advantage of. You know, if it's a homeowner doing it themselves, okay, that's shame on you for not knowing, but if it's a contractor, and he's not doing it properly, and it's not gonna last, there's no requirement for a bond, on the private property. Should we be looking out for the residents, make sure they're not being taken by,
Unscrupulous
Yes.
concrete contract.
I would say, just go look, there's a driveway that was put in on Cedar Brook a couple of years ago. And it's on the right side as you go off Lozannaville, where somebody poured half of their front yard with concrete, and that thing is all cracked. When I saw it go in, I thought, what is this? Next day it was all poured, and I thought, this looks, and of course, 6 months later, there's cracks in the concrete,
So I think the quality of the concrete is kind of a secondary consideration in something like that. Because don't our ordinances say that only a certain percentage of your front yard can actually be concrete?
Correct.
And that's why we would need the certificate, is to say, yeah, you're over 2/3 concrete doing this.
they'll need
You
a
also
zoning
know
A
certificate
certificate if
anyways.
you're wanting,
It's just they won't need the building permit. That's the difference.
Oh, I see what you're saying,
Yeah, they're required to have a zoning certificate,
to put a driveway,
but the homeowner can do it themselves right now without a building permit.
okay.
Well, we're doing that without a zoning certificate too. There's no real requirement, which is what I would like to see us tighten up, because when these situations where we've had to go back and try to get things corrected, it's because people didn't tell us what they were doing in the first place.
I mean, you can make the argument that, the no building or other structure shall be erected, moved, enlarged, structurally altered, nor shall any building, structure, or land be established or changed in use. I mean, I don't know.
Well, it becomes a question of, do you define structure to include driveways?
Right.
There's
So we
a-
might as well just specify it and get it
Right,
done.
if we define structure to include a driveway, then a zoning permit is required. And when the zoning permit is required, the county's saying, we don't care about the concrete, it's not in the right of way. We don't care about the concrete because it's not steps. What do we want to do? What do we want to care about? Do we fall back? Because again, the county, we amend the building code. The county may say, whoa, that's the Ohio Basic Building Code. You're off limits for that.
Yeah.
But do we have enough in our property maintenance code? It's kind of after the fact enforcement when a driveway's cracking
Mhm.
to say property maintenance code violation, fix your driveway. Are we comfortable with that is how we catch the unscrupulous contractor after the fact. Because the zoning permit, unless we get into the standard and the quality of the work, the zoning permit is just gonna tell us how wide it is, where it
Exactly.
is that okay?
Yeah, I think you could, some townships require a zoning permit to replace a driveway. Some don't. The plus to requiring it is, you say, are you replacing it the same width? Are you changing it? And then you could have, here's our rules of like, can't be more than a third of the width of the lot, so for whatever our rules may be. In terms of policing the quality of it, I don't know.
Well, you could.
I mean, I get
If
it.
you're doing it, with it can't be, X amount, the width, can you say it's gotta be a minimum of 4 inches thick?
I would think.
Or 5 inches
Here's-
thick with
Here's
rebar?
our standards, our town, village standards. Minimum of 4 inches thick, 4,000 PSI, kind of like, or you could just say, like American Concrete Institute, and then,
Exactly, refer like the building code does, it
Right,
refers to those
right.
standards.
yeah, there's certain standards,
Can we do that, just refer to the standard?
Well, that gets the question back to the county. When we made you our building official and we adopted the Ohio Basic Building Code, can we layer on to the Ohio Basic Building Code? And if we do, will you enforce it? If you won't enforce it, will you give us the authority
Gotcha.
to be able to enforce it? Because by definition, they're the building official. Under the Basic Building Code, only the building official can enforce.
I would say this statement here in this 114501, just that second, is structure or land. I mean, structure or land could be,
I know,
that covers so much, and land could be your driveway's wider than it was originally. You're altering the land, but I don't know that's. really
But again, we're
vague.
talking two different things. We're talking area of driveway versus quality
Oh,
of.
I understand, but whatever this is saying, it just says structure or land. So we're sort of saying, we're watching your land, whatever that means.
Well, we would correct this by going back to our definition of structure
Okay,
and including in the structure a driveway.
okay. I get it.
Because when you include by structure, the definition includes a driveway. Now, no other structure, driveway shall be erected, moved, enlarged, or altered without a zoning permit.
Okay.
That picks up driveways.
Mhm.
But the question becomes, will the county allow us to set the standard for how a driveway must be constructed?
Okay.
Will they enforce it, or will they authorize you to enforce that component part of the code? Because you have to be a certified building official under Ohio Basic Building Standards
correct.
to enforce the code.
Well, why would we allow someone to pour a driveway based on, like we said, if it's not gonna last? And
That becomes an issue with the county. Why won't you put a simple standard in here for how driveways should be constructed so it applies to townships? It applies to everything else.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't have to reinvent the wheel, like Matt said, they could just refer to the American Concrete Standards.
Right.
And
And the other thing is it's got standards, for instance, if it cracks. Okay, concrete cracks, but is it, like, there's a standard of when it needs to be replaced? It has to spread or heave more than 5/8 of an inch.
Oh.
So it's pretty lenient.
Yeah, it is.
It just has a few cracks and they're hairline cracks. It's,
yeah,
So-
They don't care.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of these standards are like, it's kind of covers the bases, but it's not like, it doesn't say it has to be perfect, so.
Well, when we get driveway that's been poured and over time it starts to crack and it starts to heave, we've got the authority under the property maintenance code to say you gotta fix it.
That's what I was getting at.
Okay,
So
yeah.
property maintenance, my driveway used to be blacktop and it was a mess. And,
Mhm.
you know, that's a whole nother issue with water coming down. But now I have concrete poured and I think a Rumpke truck came. I know he did. And it cracked the corner of the concrete. I'm assuming it's 5 inches, whatever thick. I don't know. No one came and inspected it.
Yeah. Well, like that's typically like, is that in like an alley or?
Service drive, but
Yeah.
it's my drive going to the
Yeah.
building, but, you know, blacktop lasts, what, 15 years? Roughly,
Yeah,
you know, so, but just like property maintenance, so what happens for those who has concrete or blacktop poured, it dilapidates, now we're saying, oh, you gotta get it fixed, well, had we been on the front end to some degree to make sure it was done properly, would we be in a situation, either way it goes, they're gonna get stuck.
yeah,
Either from the quality of work or now us enforcing the maintenance aspect of it. I don't care if it's chipping paint on the house, concrete, I mean, my driveway was horrible, just the blacktop itself, you know, so some people won't care and they'll let it stay that way unless it's enforced based on property maintenance. Just something to think
Do we have
about.
any idea of how, I mean, so this is obviously not a new situation.
Right.
You know, do we have any idea how other communities are handling this? And I mean, we're talking, there are several moving parts here where we're talking about like the area of the driveway, we're talking about the quality of the driveway, and then we're talking about dealing with the dilapidated driveway after the fact. So some of these things are already covered, obviously. The dilapidated driveway is covered under
maintenance.
property maintenance. The area of the driveway, as I understand it, is already covered as well from a standpoint of the dictation of how much percentage of a yard can be.
We should look at that to make sure that we're comfortable with it.
Okay, so if we want to break this down to just one issue and hammer out one issue at a time, sounds to me like the first one is like dictating, or how do we dictate or mandate the quality of the job that's done?
And that's where we've got to talk to the county in terms of, do you have an enforceable national concrete, whatever standard for any concrete that's poured? We would like you now to apply that to not just work in the right of way, but to all driveways and all concrete structures on the property. And we're defining structure to include driveways, sidewalks, and so forth. So first goes back to the county. If you don't, and we would like to have that in Gulf Manor, how do you allow us to do that? Can we layer it on top of the Ohio Basic Building Code, and will you enforce it? Or we layer it on top of it and you go, that's your baby to worry about?
I think it's kind of like the fencing issue we have, because we have a standard, because we don't want, you know, Gulf Marina looking like some prison camp, if you will, with all the stockade fences. So we established a lattice feature, if that, some decorative. So, you know, concrete being poured, quality, I mean, some people are into saving money, and so they'll get anybody they can, run some concrete, it looks good for a moment. So I think it's important as far as what we're trying to establish as a village. Otherwise, you're gonna have someone else, you know, if there's a width issue, that's good. Otherwise, someone's gonna make their whole front yard a driveway because there's no place to park because of limited parking. So the width issue is important in my perspective. As I think quality too. I mean, but I'm not trying to say, hey, because if we don't, then someone's gonna find a loophole and we'll be back to different areas where we've been at, you know.
What we need to talk about on coverage is, what standard do we want for coverage? Thinking about the size of the lots in the village, if we adopt a standard, what's that gonna look like for a standard lot? And are we gonna now have a number of non-conforming properties? So when we do that, and then the other question is, if I'm talking coverage, do I also want a certain setback from the property line, or can you be right on the property line with your driveway? So those are some things we pick up in terms of that coverage, that density, the permitting, we can cover that. Now I'm gonna throw another one at you. Guy says, I don't want a concrete walk. My brother-in-law is gonna put in pavers. He's just gonna come over this weekend. He's got a wheelbarrow full of sand and I found these in a junkyard and I'm gonna put those in. It's not concrete. Do we inspect that? What's the standard for installing that?
You talking about on private property or?
It's the sidewalk that goes from the driveway to the front steps.
I don't know how you would.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, that's why like the county and the city, it's sort of like from the right of way back. I mean,
Your
in
property.
terms of like the building code, like the rise and the run of steps.
Yeah, that's all
what have you,
good.
Those are standards. But in terms of what material, it could be stone, it could be bricks, it could be concrete, it could be, I mean,
It could be
but I've
decorative,
seen blacktop sidewalks,
decorative gravel.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess to a degree, I kind of feel like we need to take the same approach with the driveway from a standpoint of, as a village, we can only do
Here's-
so much as far as protecting people from
themselves.
as far as, I mean, you get what you pay for. And if you take the cheap route of pouring concrete on your property, then it comes back to bite you when it becomes a maintenance issue. I don't know how.
In terms
Sorry.
of driveways, the city of Cincinnati it has to be either blacktop, concrete, or it could be pavers, but that you can't have gravel. So for instance, if somebody says, I'm just gonna have gravel, well, it's gotta be I don't know how they phrase it. It's like a permanent or they don't want somebody to have a gravel driveway.
And that has been tried here where someone has tried to extend their driveway by smashing gravel down into the side.
Okay.
And I think I don't know, Jim, since you've been on, that's happened. I think that was when Officer Matthews was dealing with it.
yeah, I haven't had that.
I think the other thing that goes with this that I've seen recently in Upper are the retaining walls along driveways.
Well, that gets back to it being a structure. It is subject to the building code.
Yeah,
It is gonna be inspected.
Because we've had a number of those go in and those went in and I don't know if there were even permits for them.
Well, many of those were installed in the 40s, 50s.
Well, I'm talking about today, people
Today.
are starting to replace
Yeah,
the old rock and replacing them with these stackable, manufactured blocks, And I don't even, I take it there's a standard for that.
But those should have footers under them, when they're so high.
I get it.
And so, yeah, I mean, those need to be inspected
Sure.
as well,
Okay.
which.
But that goes
I
apart
don't-
with driveways where people, they'll replace the wall and they'll widen the driveway a couple of feet and just pour some concrete there to make the driveway a little wider to walk on it, Okay.
So looking forward, I think ideally, this past week has been a good example of some of the issues that we deal with. We had a flurry of activity over the weekend of people upset because we plowed their cars in with the snow and ice. And our approach and what we started telling people back on Wednesday was get off the street.
Yeah.
Use your driveways, park in a parking lot, just get your car off the street. A lot of the things that we deal with that are negative with parking issues is people say they can't fit their cars in their driveway. That to me is that if you've purchased property where your car doesn't fit in your driveway, that's your parking space. You need to invest in your property and fix that. So we would have a flurry of activity doing that kind of work that I think quality and making sure that the design is right and those kinds of things are things that we should be controlling.
Because it was too narrow to begin with, they can't park in their driveway. If we have that variance or how wide it has to be, a third more than,
Yeah, and that might be, if they're gonna go, if they wanna make it wider than
Right.
that, and they go for a variance.
Well, there's a good example over here on Bremont. I think it's the fourth or fifth house as you're going east on the right. They had a very small driveway and they actually moved the wall over to the front of the yard. And I think it was just this last year, they finally incorporated steps back in. But that project was done, initially started in 2013 with NIC, and it took him 4 years to finish that. And then this past summer is when he actually put the steps in. So I have no clue what was controlled there or what was inspected or what. And it's a nice job. It turned out well, but it was disruptive. It was dangerous. It was mud all over the street for months. And that's where we're missing control of things, is being able to, because I don't even know that anybody knew that he was doing that project. And it just took, we have this.
A while.
Yeah.
For a driveway instead of steps.
Well, this commission approved in 2016, I believe, the filling in of a driveway on Elbrook with putting a porch over the front of it. And just last year, they finally put the porch on. So this stuff's taken people forever to get done.
That's another problem.
So do we have the authority to control the time frame of some projects?
Yes.
We do.
Example, look down here,
It's only good for a year.
Yeah.
11:45.
Expiration?
Part of this is communication too, because
1
I
year.
think, to Mr. Podol's point, our website needs to be better in terms of explaining this stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about that. But I think before we start doing that, we need to make sure that we're in agreement on what these policies are, and then start getting this out here and enforcing it like crazy. Because honestly, the amount of time that it takes us to go back and find people and then explain over and over and over again why something shouldn't have been done to get them to comply, it's just a waste of time. It'd be easier if they just complied when they first started the project.
So as far as the question though about like the quality of the work, I think that's got to be an easy one to answer, because either the counties will oversee it or they won't. And there is either a vehicle for us to do it or there's not. Because like I said, I have to imagine that this has been addressed in other communities prior
Yeah,
to
I
this.
mean, as Matt's saying, City of Cincinnati has their own building department. They have their standards, they have their driveway standards. Other communities that use NIC, they just set the code. This is what we require. We can do some of these controls through zoning. I'm not sure how much of those controls we can do by modifying the Ohio Basic Building Code. Back to the example of zoning on driveways. We used to have the map up here that had the layout of every lot. We look at the average width of a lot. And then we figure out what our standard is for how much lot coverage you can have with a driveway. Then we look at it and say, well, can anybody park a car on that?
Yeah.
Do we have to leave? Lights went out.
I think they're not sure we're here.
We just look at that, and as we're updating the code, to say, okay, do we have the controls in place for setbacks? Do we have the controls in place for percentage of coverage? Is it gonna allow people to park a car, or are we creating a lot of nonconformities? If you create a nonconformity, they cannot do anything to that driveway, anything to that wall, without coming and getting a variance.
So you're saying the walls falls under structures?
Walls fall under structure.
I think we should
Hey, it's
spell
Ron. Could
that
you
out.
put the whole
Yeah.
language back on? We have a
Retaining
planning
walls should
commission
be
meeting
spelled
going on.
out separately from structures, because I don't
All right, I
know of
appreciate
anybody
it.
that
Thank
calls a
you.
retaining wall a structure.
Bye.
Impractical.
Well, you can spell out wall, but then maybe it's like they click on wall or they go, and, up to 4 feet, it doesn't have to be engineered. Over 4 feet, it's supposed to be an engineered wall.
Right.
So, if you're putting a little landscape wall in, it's 18 inches, 2 feet.
Yeah.
Up to 4 feet, it's theoretically, you don't have to have engineering.
And likely, the walls that we're concerned about are 4 feet or higher.
Right.
Right. Yeah. and
We're not
that's
concerned about this decorative.
No, like you
Yeah, a
say,
little landscape wall or a
Right.
dry stack stone, no problem. But the 4 to 6 to 8 foot wall, yeah, that should be a concern.
driveways need to have a standard because cars are gonna be on them, they're gonna crack, they're gonna deteriorate.
Right.
So we gotta figure out how we set that standard and who's gonna enforce it. But back to this question of the public sidewalk, very typically, it gets upgraded for repairs when we do an inspection. And then we say to them, you can get your work done by Adlita, or you can do it on your own. But when we do that, we say, but you have to do it to the standard.
Right.
We cover that. Where we don't cover is the person on their own who says, wow, I think I'm gonna take care of this crack in my sidewalk. Do we wanna address a whole code on that person who's gonna be addressing the one crack on their sidewalk? Or figure in our program for public sidewalks, we're gonna pick this up. Because 90+% of our people, when we say we're gonna do your street, they use Adlita. Because we can put it on the tax bill and pay it off over years.
Right.
It's few that say, no, I'm gonna do it on my own.
Right.
But I think when we have them do it on our own, we specify you must do it consistent with this.
Right.
I agree with that.
And it should be inspected.
So we cover driveways and we cover aprons because it's in the right of way. Back to this question of the little sidewalk that goes from the driveway to those steps. If we're not gonna worry about the type of pavers they put down or inspecting the pavers they put down, why are we then worrying about how well they do their concrete? We are concerned with the steps.
Right.
Covered, it's a structure.
I agree.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little,
Yeah.
that's why they don't, the city, the county, from the public right away back, whether it's 3 inches thick, 4 inches, or if it's blacktop, concrete, pavers, it just can't be gravel.
And what we're concerned about is taking care of the person who gets taken advantage of.
Right.
So is the best way of doing that is we're trying to communicate zoning permit, be aware when you do concrete work on your property, the contractor should work consistent with this standard.
I wonder what Montgomery does in some of these other townships. For instance, even if it's blacktop, there's the gypsies that do blacktop and, people don't know, but if they put it down 3/4 of an inch thick, it's not gonna hold up.
I don't think Montgomery regulates it outside the basic building code through NIC.
Right. But, well,
In the
they'll do
public side,
size of it, the size and the zoning part,
yes.
yes. But in terms of the quality, no.
The installation, no.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, I'm with you, and maybe you put on there, maybe the homeowners need to be educated.
Right.
They could go to the American Concrete Institute website, they could say, here's standards for a residential driveway, minimum of 4 inches thick.
Well, yeah, there's only so much we can
I
do
was
to
gonna say, a
protect
lot of
people.
faith in people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading, they're lucky, we get lucky to get them to look at our website, much less another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I know that American Concrete Institute is pretty riveting.
Pretty what?
Pretty
Riveting?
stuff, yeah.
No. So I don't, it's like, yeah, it'd be nice if but at least the zoning part will kind of slow down the process.
Yeah, there's some oversight with it, but
Yeah, I think my concern would be people doing anything. I think you say, here's when you need a zoning permit, here's when you need a building permit, and all the other stuff.
Well, you
What they
could,
have to do to beat that is when they apply for the permits, they'll have to put down what they're doing. And
we would say you gotta get a zoning permit.
Yeah.
And when the person goes in for a zoning permit and says, we're gonna put this little sidewalk in between our driveway and steps, then you can say, make sure your contractor's using this standard.
and I think that's when you do it.
yeah.
They're not gonna look ahead of time.
Right.
You'll be lucky to catch it.
But all we're trying to do is get their attention with a
Right.
zoning permit, and we're expanding the zoning permit to make sure everybody understands it includes any structure.
Yes.
And there are certain structures which will also require a building permit.
Yeah.
And that would be when you're in the right of way. And again, maybe the county would pick up driveways as structures and enforce a standard with weed control.
Yep.
Coverage we control.
Yeah.
And it's just buttoning up our definitions. Make sure driveways listed as a structure, sidewalks are listed as a structure.
Aprons, right?
Make sure our right-of-way section is very clear on the standards for construction, concrete in the right-of-way. So that when they're coming in for a right-of-way permit, we say, here's what you've got to now do. And then we can inspect those because it's part of our right-of-way.
Okay. And you'll spell out what the right of way is, because I think a lot of people have no idea what that means.
And then we'll look at what City of Cincinnati does on their driveways to see if there's a standard there that we could bring in here.
And the right of way typically is a foot behind the public sidewalk,
Typically.
typically. I mean, it could vary, but
Oh, a foot behind.
behind, yeah.
Yeah, the right-of-way is measured from the center line or a standard width. We're very old, so.
Yeah.
Ours might be 50 feet, 25 from the center line.
It depends how wide the street is,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, but yeah, it goes a lot of times from the center line, and let's say the street's 24 feet wide. Well, the right of way might be 13, you know.
And what's tough is the right-of-way, if it's a dedicated area, sometimes the street's over here and sometimes the street's over there. But it's also their responsibility, with the right-of-way, come in and say, where is my right-of-way? And we can figure it out from our maps.
Yeah.
But you know that any apron is in that right-of-way.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
It's definitely in
the
the
apron is all in the right of way.
And the sidewalk between the apron and the driveway is part of the right of way, right?
And it's a
Yeah,
question of how
right.
much flare are we willing to accept?
Mhm.
The other question is the curbing. You know,
Well, the curb is certainly in the right of way.
but I mean, what's the standard for a curb? When we do it by contractor, and we set the standard.
Right, well, it depends what the style of it is. It's a roll curb, it's a box curb. But I mean, the homeowner can't change that. They're not gonna, you can't typically change that. But although we did it and got permits to change, you know, people have a race car, you know, and they're like, that rolled curb, that's the standard. You know, they're like, I can't get my Corvette up there without bottoming it out.
The exhaust pipes do rub about that.
Is that a problem, Lou?
Yes. My front spoiler, I have to angle out of the driveway very slightly,
Exactly.
and he knows that problem with that.
You're this much-
Is that with the roll curve?
Some of them, yeah.
Yes.
Remember, we had the guy
Because we're
who did
going
his
to
own driveway a couple years
I
ago.
know. Well, I'm talking about.
Cutting
Is that
the
an
street.
easier thing to deal with the box curb?
Yeah,
Remember?
right, yeah.
Oh, yeah. that's
The
right,
box
yeah.
curbs are easier to deal with.
I don't know what kind of curb
It's
we
a
put in.
flat entrance.
And your speed calming humps, that's
And we-
another whole problem.
His neighbors all come in and
Defended them. yeah.
defended him, and I mean, it's like,
Who's this?
nice guy.
Remember the guy who put in his own driveway,
Oh, yeah.
widened it,
Well,
took-
he widened.
he made a driveway and a half.
There was a drive that went down to the garage, like
Yeah,
a lot of.
yeah.
Well, this, he added a driveway
To the side.
basically up into the yard, and
And he still blocks the sidewalk.
He what?
Still blocks the sidewalk
Yes.
Wow.
with all his cars.
But what curb did he put in?
It's a box curb. Well, so you guys are thinking a little bit differently. So like my driveway, it's been paved up to the curb, so there is no curb to get into my driveway. It is a flat, straight shot because it's been paved on top. So like when I park on my side street, I can park on the grass, I can park on the street. There is no change in elevation because the blacktop was laid up to the point of the curb.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's so much blacktop put down.
Right. So when you're replacing like Vera, they're doing box curves, but it's cut out at the end
Right.
apron to the driveway where it's a flat. There's no
Yeah.
roll. Like the house that I grew up in suburbs of Westchester, it's a rolled curb, and you had to take an angle, otherwise you're ripping off your front spoiler.
Which is
So-
how like our streets like that. You still have those.
Yeah. So like those can be treacherous, but all the box curves, they cut it out so it's flat with the street.
it's defined though where the driveway is. It's a
Absolutely,
box curb, it's like,
You
You
miss
can't
it,
just
you're,
add on because now you like, well, you
Yeah.
know, 6-inch curve.
correct.
Yeah, Concrete Fremont took care of that. That
And
was
that-
defined.
The guy on Elbrook kind of shaved the box edge to get his truck up over it, quite, you know. And, you know, it looks like it was hand slathered of a curb, but, yeah.
So probably in our right of way, making sure we clarify the standard for construction.
Yeah.
But maybe add in there, the curb shall be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood.
Well, shouldn't the village have last rights of approval on right of way?
Mhm.
Because it's like the guy in Graceland that made his driveway bigger. Why was that his responsibility to determine what kind of apron he was gonna put there?
That's what I'm saying, we should have either decide all curbs will be this standard, or because of the age of the community, if you do this, it's gotta match the surrounding properties.
But when he did that, that was still a rolled curb. So there weren't breaks or cuts for driveways.
Right,
It was consistent rolled curb.
right.
The right of way should be like most places have, you have to be an approved licensed contractor
To do right away work.
to do right of way work.
That makes sense.
And bonded.
Right.
Our code requires that if you're doing work in a right of way, it's gotta be bonded.
Okay, well, that's already covered then, right?
We covered under street openings, but we should expand it to include any work in the right of way.
I agree with that.
Which would eliminate people just deciding on their own they're going to try and patch this
Okay.
whatever situation regarding sidewalk or curb. Doesn't mean that they won't try.
Yeah,
If it's in the right of way, then that's.
it should be defined.
If it's on their private property, you know, how they repair it, how they construct that sidewalk.
I've seen some people just pour concrete right where the grass was at, just to give them something to park on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's kind of,
And at that point, it's like several years, it'll be gravel again. and
Yeah.
We don't allow gravel, you know, or we should state that if we don't already.
Which comes back to property maintenance.
Okay. So do we have enough here to?
Yeah, I'll take these notes. I'll put together where these points are. I'll get with Jim over where we think that gap might be to ask the county specifically what they enforce. And then we can bring it back for planning commission to make a recommendation to modify the code.
Okay.
Does that sound like a plan?
I also talked about electric when they required a permit for that. And it was kind of a vague answer. Anytime they extend a circuit, add a circuit, replace a service, replace a drop. But as far as like, you know, replacing outlets and stuff, that's not.
Right, you go to
That's
Home
maintenance.
Depot and get your own outlet, they trust you're gonna put it in correctly.
Plumbing
Or
permits,
die.
anytime you change a drain or you do an addition.
Mhm.
That was the basic gist of it. Yeah, so if you know, which is a major undertaking, you know.
Right.
But if you're adding, you know, any addition, like if, even in your basement, if you're adding a bathroom down there, you're supposed to get a permit.
And the tough thing is, the Home Depots and so forth, they have all these DIYs,
Yep.
DIYs, to instruct you how to become a contractor on your own on the weekend.
Yeah,
And they have people, they just, oh, you're buying this? Here, call this guy, he'll put it in. That's bypasses the whole system.
yeah, the chore is catching, like if they're putting an addition on their house, obviously that's
Yeah.
easy. But it's the, you know, we're never gonna count on.
Right, you're not gonna catch everybody. You can't.
A lot of it's educating people to be aware. There's some things you can do on your own, but you should not do on your own.
Yeah.
And there's things that you gotta make sure you've got a qualified contractor to do the work so that they don't take advantage of you. Because that was the warning, remember years ago, every May, they'd run this stuff in the newspaper about the gypsies.
Yep.
They're all coming in town for Memorial Day. And they'll come through and they'll do your driveway and they'll do this and that, and they're gone.
Never
Do
be
the
heard
road.
from again.
Right.
Yeah, that's happening now.
Jim, what were you representing about service, electrical service?
If you replace a service,
Okay.
then you need a permit.
Like the circuit panel or.
Yeah,
the
so like
drop
if you're gonna
from-
upgrade from a 100 amp service to a 200 amp service, they have to put a new box in, circuit box, obviously you need a permit for that.
But if the service isn't changing, you're just upgrading from fuses to circuit breakers and all that.
You should-
Yeah, if you change it from fuses to a circuit box, it's an upgrade to the service, you need a permit for that.
I'll be getting a permit.
Yeah, anything that utility comes to the corner of your property, to the house or building, the rest of it's all yours. If you change any of that,
Yeah,
well, I don't think Duke, Duke wouldn't change the service unless there was a permit. in it.
yeah, that's what, if you're gonna upgrade from like 100 to 200 amp service, they're not gonna do it until and it's IBI who does, you get a building permit, but IBI does the inspections.
Yeah, I had another one at my other property, but they just upgraded, they put ranges in, so they had to do a 100 amp service or something, so 150, whatever, so. This one, I'm tired of people blowing fuses, so.
Yep.
When I left 20 amp fuses downstairs where it should have 15 amps, people are just screwing stuff in there.
They don't care.
Yeah.
At least they're not putting pennies in like the old days.
Yep,
Okay, so
okay,
as far as, so we're square away on what we're doing for the next steps on that.
Right.
All right, so next item then on here, consideration of changes to the fence ordinance.
Just a question. Most of the variances that we're called upon to do have been a one higher fence than 4 feet.
Mhm.
We allow 6 foot across the back. We allow 6 foot if you abut a commercial, industrial, or multifamily. But we're giving variances again and again and again for 6 foot. Now the exceptions become the rule.
yes.
And if the exceptions have become the rule, are there any things that we want to put in there? If you remember when we had the property that ran along, it was a corner lot.
Mhm.
And we said, well, wait a minute. When you're on that corner lot, even though it's a backyard line or a side lot line, we want something decorative because people see that.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, do we want to put something in the code that says you can put 6 foot? But here's the areas where that 6 foot has to be decorative. If I'm looking between the houses, do I want to see the Fort Apache? Those of us of an age would remember Fort Apache, the stockade. Do I want to say, I can see that, you can have it 6 foot, but this top section has to be decorative. And then if we do that, then we get into some of the side areas. When do we want to have a decorative? Do we want to have a decorative if it becomes forward from your back building line? Do we want to say it becomes forward from the back building line of your neighbor? We want it decorative. I don't know. I know we talked about last time the cost of decorative. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Do we want to, before we adopt changes to the code, have Mills give us an idea? What's it cost to put in that? What's it cost per foot? Are we putting something that's cost prohibitive to people? What are the standards for decorative? Do we want to put something in the code to say, here's some examples of what you can do? Do we care? Or it's okay, 6 foot,
I think,
anywhere you
I
want?
think we want to avoid going down the path of just put 6 foot fences and we don't care what it is. I mean, every backyard's gonna look like a stockade. And people are
So-
more and more private these days, right? They want more and more hiding the people next door, and that's, I mean, the recent variance we just allowed was, well, there's already a 6 foot fence there. So all we're doing is finishing the line,
So do we
Is that
want
okay?
to include this on old business for the next planning meeting where we take some time to think about
Yes.
and then come back and revisit that?
Would you want us to come back to that meeting and say, here's some examples, the mills for tops? Are they 18 inches? Are they 2 foot? Where do we want to say you have to do that?
Now, a
And
lot
then-
of times those are pre-made
Right.
panels. So like if there's a standard, no sense in like putting extra,
We're not saying we want you to
Burden.
customize it,
right.
but here's where you can go to a Mills or another fence company or even a Home Depot and you buy kit. And again, I don't know whether it's 18 inches or 2 feet. And we say, if you want to go above 4, that portion of your fence has to be this open, decorative design. Here's some examples.
I think
And if you
that's-
do that,
I like
you don't
that.
have to come here.
Right.
But if you want something different, then you do have to come here. And like we did for the corner lot, we said, we'll consider opacity. That's how close.
That's a
it
nice
is.
word.
Decorative features of the fence, landscaping. So if you can't meet that standard to get your 6-foot high fence, then you gotta come in for a zoning permit or a variance. And these are some of the things we're gonna consider.
Okay.
You know, we had heard, well, they had 4 foot because the police could then jump between yards.
Yeah.
I think the 4 foot was so that people could see what's going on.
That's exactly what it is.
You could see what was going on. If there was something suspicious going on, a police officer could see over the 4 foot. But if we go 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, it becomes an aesthetic issue. It becomes an air issue too. Where's the breeze blowing?
It's a terrible visual.
So the other thing that I think in that ordinance we need to take a look at is materials. Because that seems to come up when people are asking about if they can build a fence.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of newer stuff out there that's made out of PVC.
Great, the vinyl fences.
Yeah.
They're cheap and they're easy to maintain.
And there are some where, actually we have one next door here
Mhm.
where they're right at the sidewalk. And we really don't control that.
Well, we control it from the standpoint that fences should only be in the rear yard. But we may, I mean, that's the odd thing. Here's right next door and nobody enforced it.
Right.
But I think that goes back 3 or 4 building inspectors prior to Jim.
Maybe Oscar.
No, that's going back.
Yeah.
So we'll get some information for you.
Okay.
And I think the information would be the linear cost for decorative and
And
how
what the height, and
standard,
what the heights are.
what's the standard for
Yeah, what's the
decorative.
standard, so you're not buying something
Right.
special.
And then think in terms of when the houses are staggered, what portion of it would you want to say, well, you're coming from behind the back line of the building, we want that decorative. You know, what I'm hearing from all the hearings we've had is, we don't care when you go from the back of your house to the back of your yard. We don't care.
Mhm.
And if your house lines up with your neighbors, we don't care. But when they're starting to be staggered is where we do have a concern or care for that decorative feature.
Yep.
And I think there was a question too last time, can you do that on a gate?
Yes.
I think you can, but we'll find out from experts. And then modify the zoning code to cut down on the number of requests for variances. But if you remember, a lot of times we don't get a request for a variance, we get a request for forgiveness. So this would be where we could say in the code, it's gotta be this way. And that kind of morphs into that last topic of enforcing when we give a variance. Every day, when you give a variance, you've modified the zoning for that property. Every day they're not in compliance with what you said they can do is a separate violation. And I think we're almost gonna have to start down that path.
Yep.
We have the lady who got taken advantage of by a contractor and has not corrected what we told her she needed to do. Mitigation, I think we have to leave to the magistrate.
Yep.
Because if we start mitigating it in the enforcement end, where do you draw the line?
Because that's still sitting as a fence, it's a violation.
So one of the things I've had discussions with the We Thrive group about is tapping into resources that when we have people who need walls rebuilt, roofing issues, something like this where you need a contractor, I think we can probably develop a list like that, but I think that's something we want to have a conversation with code enforcement about. So that's a longer term project. Maybe we can have something up and running by the third quarter this year, or at least have some cards we can hand out to somebody.
Is that? Do we have the exposure for us, the village recommending a private contractor?
We wouldn't recommend.
Right.
we've got immunity. We can do no wrong. But we don't want to get into the business of recommending contractors. But people working cooperatively as an agency that oftentimes will come in and help someone who's elderly or help someone who's
Right.
got limited financial means to address health and safety issues around their home.
They do that all the time.
Yeah.
And they're good at it.
But having that list, here's a group of contractors you may call, people working cooperatively you can call. It's that fine line of, we said, go to that person and they don't do the job right, and we're on.
Right, then they go back, look.
Exactly, that's what
Yeah.
I was,
Oh,
but if we have a list of contractors and said pick one,
Here's a list of contractors that doesn't work here and they meet the standards.
it could be a roof contract, I don't know.
Well, and if
How
we're
you-
dealing like with people working cooperatively or with Habitat for Humanity, those are relationships that we'll make or have made that we know that they are pretty reputable in terms of helping people who are in a bind.
Mhm.
So I agree, we don't want to put ourselves in a position of liability, but my one concern is having a perception that we are going after someone who's without financial means to be able to correct a situation. And I know, I just think it's something we need to be considerate of.
I agree.
That's something we'll work on as we continue down. We're not working that tonight, right?
No, these are just identifying resources for people.
I think that's a good idea.
So we tried,
Simple is better for people if they don't have to
I
work.
mean, the thing to remember is, that particular situation on Bremont, I mean, we were holding that person to the same standard that we've held everyone else to at this point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
That's the dichotomy of it. But the one thing, just to make you aware, it's not on that list, but under the engagement committee, we have a group called We Thrive, who's basically a program of Hamilton County for health and wellness. Jacqueline Threadgill and Casey Dressel are the navigators for the community. And they're looking for opportunities to promote health and wellness and assistance for residents who need it in the village. They just got off the ground, so there's a lot of good things that we can do, which can be things like helping to abate grass in the summertime, shoveling snow in the wintertime. I think we've missed that boat this year, but those are the kinds of things that we can have some impact to help people with. So, and this might be another area where we can do that.
What we can do for our next meeting is I'll get with Jim on those resources that you need to tap into, to get the information. I'll put together where I think the codes need to be tied up, bring it to you, and we can go forward with it. What we may want to do Monday night at council is when we're amending a zoning code, it typically has to be initiated by council saying, would you please look into this? Or we say, can we look into it? And council says yes. So maybe just to keep them all moving, I'll ask for simple motion to allow us to update the zoning code relative to code enforcement with some of these gaps.
Do we want to do that under the planning commission section of the meeting or under yours?
Either one.
Yours is
All right.
fine. That was
The
that.
ball.
Yeah, you tossed that one right over the wall, didn't you?
I will take care of that simple motion that we're dotting i's and crossing t's to, because some of these are amending the zoning code. When we change the requirements for the right of way, that's a different section, that's streets. But when we get into redefining structure, we don't want somebody to say, we didn't amend your code correctly.
Sure.
okay, so in this conversation, we've kind of crossed over into the enforcement of planning commission rulings. Is there more discussion that needs to be had there?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March 7th at 6:30 PM. And apparently we have a property variance hearing scheduled for that as well.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else?
Everybody's aware that two of us are swapping positions in the next month. Okay.
What is the executive committee?
That's as long as council and the mayor do their jobs.
Oh, is it like
Remember your
kind of a
broadcast.
peer review?
Your broadcast.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I meant
So
that
for
with
example, the
the greatest of
non-discrimination
love.
ordinance of payment, that started in the executive committee. And it was developed to a point, and then we moved it from executive committee to council so that it could be finalized. It was a very smooth
They kind of tackled the minutia
process.
everything from parking issues to playground equipment to all the things.
Whatever ain't finance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not fun.
There you go.
So things begin, a lot of things begin in executive, and then as there's, okay, we're far enough along now, it can go to council, so it's not a, 10 meeting drawn out discussion. It can be
You did something
a
like-
review and
like-
go.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thanks
Yes.
for that.
I thought the
Turn that
maintenance
off.
department did a fantastic job on the snow removal.
Right.
I
Probably
agree.
the best I've ever seen.
And I will say, did you hit end yet?
That was a tough
Um,
one too.